Ahmad Wahab, Anilai Rajwan, Santa Fe Jerusalem. Blessing of the Feast of Dedication. بركة اليهوى باشم يهوشي أشري منور أخي كنكي باشوان Amen. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in of Yahweh Shai, that gives to us the feast of dedication and peace. Thank you, Sophia. The Ali Ma'ar Shirayim Lechad, Psalms 121. Anya Rayim Emimya Aryam Mayan Yabo sorry Yabo Maya Shash Shamayan Warataza Ganathan Lama what? Regalia one Joshua Marka and one well Yeshan Joshua Yashua Shamar Tazali Ayo yeah yeah woman Shamash La Ayo La Balayala Yahweh Yashamari Maka Yashima Napashi Yahweh Yashima Abalaki Waya Max Wai Dabulan Basham Yahusha the what man
Psalm 121. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, coming from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. Shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth even forevermore. Amen.
Amen. Shema Yasharallah, hear O Israel. Shema Yasharallah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Akad. Shema Yasharallah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Akad. Shema Yasharallah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Akad.
Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Amen.
Amen. Tapala Yahweh, the Lord's Prayer. Abinawa, Shabbat Shemayim, Kodash, Hayeh, Shamke, Yahweh, Malakwat Keh, Taba'eh, Tazawanke, Hayeh, Aisha, Baratazah, Keh, Bashemayim, Nathanawa, Lacham, Yawam, Zad, Wasalakna, Tabawatna, Kasalachna, Tabawatna, Wala Abiyana, Oh Messiah one, I was shining with Kaya, Laka, Amalakwa, Wa Awa, Wa Taparat, Why will
Matthew 6:9. After this manner therefore pray he. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen. I Shram tells the law, the Ten Commandments. La'ahib, Yahayib, Lakahib, Alahayim, Akarim, Alapanyat, La'ahib, Daishayib, Lakahib, Hasos, Wala'ahib, Thaibidam, La'ahib, Dalakwaka, Shamwa, Yahweh, Alahayka, Lashua, Zakab, Ayawam, Ashabeth, Lakodashwa, Kabad, Abiyaka, Wa Amaka, La'ad, Taratazak, La'ad, Tana'at, La'ad, Taganat, La'ad, Tainad, Shakur, La'ad, Tachamad, Kau, Ashabad, La'aika, Amen.
Exodus 20:2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. I shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Amen.
Amen. Shabbat, please be seated. Barak Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Anah, Parya Kapin, Tuad Aman, La Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai, Yasher Allah. English translation. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, that gives to us the fruit of the vine. Thank you, so be it, to Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, with Israel. Madwa, Paniwali Rosham, stand up, face Jerusalem. Barakata Yahweh, Agada, Rakawam, Abiyah, Manawa, Ayawan, Malak, Shah, Shamayim, Waraktaza, Wakada, Barim, Kayayim, Wagam, Mashiach, Mayahawa, Wanawa, Abnawa, Palag, Yawaitiza, Yahawasha, Zakarnawa, Yahawah, Wartazawan. Ein Yash Awe, Sarnawa, Ne, what's up? Yash Awe, Oh, Nanawa, Yam Yan, Naita, Kayawumya, Nakodam, Babakushai, Shalak, Mike Allah, Wataz Wadak, Alahayim, La, Magdanawa, Raparnawa, Washamar, I'll know like Shalak. Haroke, Shao, How Shai, the Nawa, Madnawa, Rabian, Kakame, the Bawana, what I show the Barka, Bashem, Yahusha, what them, yeah, why will English translation. Blessed are you, Yahweh, the great, merciful, mighty, terrible, most high power. King of heaven and earth and all things living, and also the anointed from Yahweh, our Lord, our friend, the wonderful counselor of Yahweh Shai. Remember, Yahweh, favorably your people Israel. Help us build and gather Israel, most high, we beg you, right now, like the days of old. Please send Michael and the righteous powers to protect us, heal us, and watch over us. Mainly send the spirit of Yahweh Shai to us to teach us much wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of thy word. In the name of Yahweh Shai, thank you, always and forever, so be it. Repeat the Hebrew only. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the law. Barakat Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Atalanawa, HaTorah. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us like the sea. Barakat Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Atalanawa, Awar, Lara Awat. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the ram's horn to call the people. Barakat Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Atalanawa, Karan, Hayo, Lakorah, Ha'ain, Yeshabwa. Please be seated. Okay, so Shalom Yasharala.
Shalom.
Okay, so Shalom everyone that's here with us in Philly. Shalom everybody watching us on live stream, and Shalom everyone listening in the teleconference. Welcome to Ha Yashala Kanas, or the Congregation of Israel, where we teach that the descendants of slaves, as well as the indigenous peoples found throughout North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean mainly, make up the southern and northern kingdoms of the 12 tribes of Israel, once lost, now found. And that we as a people have fallen to a lower state politically, economically, religiously, because we broke the laws of God found in the Bible, given to us by Moses. And that we come out of this lower state that we fall into by turning back to the commandments we broke by following Jesus the Christ. And as he did when you read St. John 10, verses 22 and 23, he kept the Feast of Dedication holy. So we're going to do our best to keep the Feast of Dedication holy tonight, as you guys see in the title of the video. My name is Nabia Zerbabal. I had the pleasure and privilege of going through the lesson with us this evening. Just make sure you write down for your notes that according to the Gregorian calendar, it would be December 13th, 2025. But then according to our calendar, it would be the 9th month and the what day? Anybody? For folks that have kept this more than once. The 9th day and the 9th month and the what day would this be? Folks are not sure. Folks waiting for someone else to answer.
28th.
Which day? Oh boy, we got to do our forefathers a salad, man. We at least remember the day, the month, and the day.
9 months.
You said which day did you say?
20th.
Not the 20th. Mm-mm. Well, I'll leave that open for the class and for the chat, both of you guys. 9th month and what day are we in now? But what we're going to start,
20th.
it's going to be in the first Maccabees.
Is that the 28th day?
You're saying 2-0, right?
Yes.
No. I thought I had the scrolling marquee here, but looks like I'll just
Hmm? 20. 5 fingers.
don't give it away. Don't give it away. But either way, you guys can provide that in the chat too, what day of the month that we're in, because we know we're in the 9th month. Add a banner real quick.
It's the season. Right? It's the season to be jolly. What is that?
Oh man,
What date is that?
I know that day. Now, most folks know that one. That's a nice little hint you gave there. If you can put that together. Oh no!
Where's the calendar?
All you need is your scriptures, man. You can find it in your scriptures, brother.
The one for cat sloop.
Okay, so let's go to First Maccabees in the Apocrypha, which we do the history of the Apocrypha. It was originally part of the canonized scriptures, right? But the Catholics thought it was a good idea to remove it, and that was signed off by first the British Foreign Bible Society, and then the American Foreign Bible Society. But we can still get the Apocrypha intact, even still to this day. Even get copies of the 16th edition of the Bible, which I'll be reading from today, where we can find the books of the Apocrypha. So we're going to go to First Maccabees, second to the last book in the Apocrypha. We're going to go to chapter 1, verse 1. And we'll cover the overview of what this holy day is about, but it's a long story, not super long. Usually what we do is we'll break up the reading in 2 nights. So usually in the first night, we'll go into the first 2 chapters of the history. And then the closing of the feast, which will be this time next week, we'll go into the last 2 chapters. And then we'll pull any supplemental scriptures or history that pertain to this feast. And I quoted one already in St. John 10, 22 and 23, which I'll revisit later on. But the main reading we go through for this feast is First Maccabees chapters 1 through 4. So let's go to First Maccabees chapter 1, and let's start from verse 1. Let's read. Oh, looks like I got an answer from La Torah, and that is correct.
Ding, 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 ding.
That is correct. Send him the prize.
Ding, ding, ding.
Send him through snail mail his prize for getting the right day of the month. That is correct. So it's the 9th month and the 25th day. So that's the day that we keep the feast of dedication as far as the beginning, the day first begins. In that day, that month and that day is going to be important because it's going to start off as a bad day when you go into the history of what we're about to read. But then, like we see something similar happen with Purim, which is going to be a little bit later in the Hebrew year. That day that was a day of gloom, a bad day as far as what happened to Israel, would then be turned around into something that's righteous when it comes to us being delivered in that same time. So we'll see that that example here when it comes to the Feast of Dedication, but that 9th month, 25th day actually being something that was grim or bad that happened around that time. When you read the story, we're going to read in these first couple chapters of First Maccabees, we'll get that understanding. So First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 1, it reads, "And it happened after that, Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chetem, or also spelled with a K, Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece." Let's now get into a key figure here, prophesied by our forefathers to rise up, right? To be the first ruler to unite all of the Greeks or the Grecian Empire, right? So now we're talking about this in history now, because the time that the Maccabees was written was after the time of Alexander. Whereas, say, the prophet Daniel, for example, when he prophesied about the rise of the first king over all Greece, that was before the time of Alexander, which when you go into his rise to power, you want to remember 333 BC. Easy to remember, 3 3s. But that's what this is talking about. What I'll do real quick too is just share an image. This is something that everyone has access to. It's a free Bible atlas. And I have one of my tabs open here, showcasing the maps pertaining to what they call the Hellenistic period or the Hellenistic dynasty, which Hellen, that word Hellen just pertains to the Greeks, right? Anytime you see that name or that reference to Hellen, is talking about the Greeks. Folks watching on a phone, my apologies, might be a little bit tough to see, but it's probably easier for folks to see that are on their desktop computer or laptop. But I have a map here, it's map number 87. What I'll do too is I'll post the link, which I have done before, a copy of this Bible Atlas that's free as long as you have internet connection. They got this PDF uploaded. What this is showing is when Alexander came into power, the expanse of what he had rulership over when he was brought into power, when he came into power and took over all Greece. Because there was a lot of things that happened building up to this time period, as far as wars between the Persians and the Greeks, before he would unite all Greece and take them out. Right, one of the famous battles they've made movies about and graphic novels about is the 300, right? Yeah, but the 300 Spartans, right, with the Battle of Thermopylae. Right, that took place before this time period, but that was all just the beginning or the leading up to this event where Alexander would become the ruler over all Greece. That's what we see here on this map. Everything that you see is green became his full dominion. And then as we go down to the next map, or as I read on, the next map will showcase what takes place afterwards, after he comes into power. So now reading on in verse 2, First Maccabees chapter 1, it says, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth. It says, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. So he was exalted, his heart was lifted up, as he was the strongest man with the strongest force in the earth. It got to his head, and he became lifted up in pride. Easy to do in your flesh. You don't have the spirit to guide you, right? He had a spirit, but it wasn't the Holy Spirit, right? But it says that the earth was quiet before him. Remember, we're reading the scriptures. Peace and quiet, right? They don't always go hand in hand, right? To truly have peace, you have to have righteousness. But if you don't have righteousness when it comes to your rulership, the best you can achieve is quiet. That's why the scriptures tell us in more than one place, there shall be no peace, save the Lord, unto the wicked. Right? But now reading on in verse 4, it says, and he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. So they paid him money. That's this big expansion you see here across these different countries, because Greece is just a small part over here on the left side, right? But he spread out to take over Macedonia, Thrace, what was known as Asia then, Media, Armenia, right? All these other places you see going all the way out to the Indus Valley, or where the so-called Indians are now, but their name being Elam originally. So it went pretty far, right? Going to how far his rulership expanded, right? It says that they became tributaries unto him, those that he conquered. Verse 5 says, and after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die. He did this in a relatively short amount of time, right? You read the histories, when he came into power over all Greece, they say he was only about 21 years old. He was a young man. But it says he moved swiftly, right, when it came to conquer. And the prophecy in Daniel talks about that too, which we'll get also shortly. But this is about 10 years or so later, when he's in his early 30s at this point, he gets the sickness where he's going to die, right? He says, he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So before he died, he said, okay, everything that we've conquered together over my time of rule, I'm going to split it up between 4 of you, right? And when you go down to this next map, let me see here. You go down to this next map, you'll see these different colors represent the divisions of Alexander's empire split into 4 pieces, right? As you can see, you can say that the Seleucus or Seleucus, he had the most when it came to land. Some might argue that Ptolemy and the Sapphic is the reddish color. He had the prime real estate, but we see that Seleucus had the most real estate as far as the most land. So that's the one that you see that's like green color. Then you see the other 2 generals, they had their plot of land too. But as you notice here, the 2 ones we want to focus on are the Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom. You see marked here in green and in orange, right? So back in 1 Maccabees 1 and verse 7, it says, so Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. He died around the age of 33. If you consider what the historians talk about as far as how old he was when he took reign over all Greece and how long it took him to conquer all these lands. That's a pretty short amount of time to do a whole lot, right? But now it says in verse 8, and his servants bear rule everyone in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves, so that their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. So when these Greeks took power, it says that evils were multiplied in the earth as they were a wicked people. But now the crowns they put upon themselves after their sons after them many years, like I said, we're going to focus in mainly on the Ptolemaic and the Seleucids, but especially the Seleucids. So we're going to go down a couple years after this 323 or so BC, 323, 325 BC, depending on how you count it, right? When Alexander died, right? And we're going on his Seleucid dynasty, and a particular branch that came out of that dynasty. Before I go to verse 10, who's going to go into him, hold this. I'm just going to get a link for verses 8 and 9. Or I should say everything we read up to verse 9. So like I mentioned before, Daniel had prophesied the rise of this ruler. According to the histories, not in the scriptures, but according to the histories, you read this in the Josephus, what it talks about there. It says how when Alexander came down to Israel, to Jerusalem, to take out the city, that you had the priests, whoever the priests were at that time, at the 330s BC, they came out and presented to Alexander the prophecy that Daniel had written just some centuries previous about his rise to power, about what we're going to read. And it says that Alexander, he took note of that and said, oh, okay, well, I think you can show me that, and I'll leave you be. Just make sure you, pay your tribute, and I'll move on to the next place. I won't cause any bloodshed here. Like I said, that's according to the Josephus. You read that history, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you go to Alexander. While he was a man, you could say he was definitely a man of culture, probably too much culture, to where he was embracing all types of cultures, especially the place that he conquered when he intermingled with them. Even his name would change to where, he started off as a Macedonian, then it became the Greek, then it became the Persian, right? And other names, as far as when he conquered people, he melded and merged with their cultures and embraced those too. And lived a life of hedonism and debauchery of a high level, hence him dying so young. He's like a poster child for Esau as far as how they talk about, even though the flame that burns the brightest lasts the shortest, right? Esau fantasizes and romanticizes off this type of life. To them, this is living, right? Or carnally, to their mind, this is what it means to live. To live like someone Alexander did, right? Where you try to even get close to that. you read the histories later about the Romans who will be the next rulers after them, also Edomites as far as nation, different kingdom. Julius, the Caesar Julius, the 101 Julius, that was part of that triumvirate before Augustus Caesar came into power. You read about him becoming like obsessed, if you will, Alexander's character, to where he was in his 40s doing a lot of his conquering. But it was like he was beating himself up because he couldn't take over as much, because when it was time for the Romans to become the top rulers. He did a lot of great works too, but not on the same level as Alexander, and it tore him apart. Felt like, he wasn't living up to his conquerorship. He couldn't compete with what Alexander did just some century or so before him. But this is Daniel chapter 8. So you go to the prophets, it starts with Isaiah, goes Jeremiah, goes Ezekiel, then it goes Daniel. Now I'm in Daniel chapter 8. We're going to talk about this vision. This is Daniel chapter 8 and verse 5. It reads, "And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes." Right? This vision he has of this beast and how it's moving, all these things mean something. We jump down so they give us the edification as far as what this is talking about. It says, "And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran to him in the fear of his power." And it says, "And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns," referring to the two horns of this ram. "And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn." Right? But let me stop there real quick. So I read from 5 to 8. So little horn is going to come up in a second. But now let's jump down, because this vision, this vivid vision that Daniel's having of the ram and the he-goat that's destroying it, it means something, right? So we stay in this chapter, we jump down to verse 19. It'll give us the understanding, at least of the first part of the vision. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 19, it reads, "And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be." Verse 20, "The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia." So remember, they were the top dynasty empire that was in power before the Greeks would be in power. Remember, I mentioned the 300 earlier, as far as the graphic novel and movie based on the actual historical event of the Greeks beginning to come into power, even though it was still the reign of the Medo-Persians, right? You had different battles that led up to them eventually falling, the Medes and the Persians, to Alexander. The Greeks as a whole, and Alexander being the one to be the one in power when it went down. Verse 21 says, "And the rough goat is the king of Grecia," the same Alexander we're reading about in First Maccabees. "And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king," referring to Alexander himself, right? So the king of Grecia is referring to a line of kings, but now that horn is referring to that first king. Alexander wanted to unite them all, because even they were warring against each other. Going to 300, the Battle of Thermopylae, in that time period, which was some time before, we read about them not all being along, all being on the same page, right? He would be the one to bring them all together, right? It says, verse 22, "Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power," right? This is referring to those four that he pretty much had set up, that would rule in his stead when he was sick and bedridden. That's what these are talking about here. So Daniel, centuries before, is prophesying all these events that have taken place that are now history as far as when the Maccabees are writing this, right? Verse 23, it says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenances. So let me stop there. So I'll stop at verse 22. So hold this in Daniel chapter 8, right? Because now we're going to read about a certain figure that came out of that Seleucid dynasty. Remember that map I showed you guys earlier, right? That green plot of land that was super big, that had the most land coverage. We're going to go into the notable ones that came from the Greeks. There's 4 generals that Alexander has set up. One is going to come out of that line of kings. So we go back to First Maccabees chapter 1. Now in verse 10, it reads, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, right? The son of Antiochus the king. So this Antiochus, because their names will be used over again. This was the 4th, surnamed Epiphanes. This is the son of Antiochus the king, which this was the Antiochus the 3rd. He was also referred to as Antiochus the Great. You go into that particular Antiochus, who had been in hostage at Rome. So he was a hostage at Rome when he was younger. You know, you read other histories, it talks about how he became, you could say, fond of the Romans, the Senate, the way they had their things arranged. Even when he was there as a hostage. This is the way they would parlay with each other, right? To try to negotiate things and hold each other hostage. So Esau against Esau. It says, and he reigned the 130th and 7th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So the time when Alexander came into power up until this time was 137 years. Verse 11, in those days, so let me read for verse 10. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 8. So this is Daniel chapter 8. I know we stopped at 8, and I'm going to read chapter 8 and verse 9. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 9, it reads, and out of one of them, referring to those 4 generals, which was Seleucus, came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. But you go into that pleasant land, it's making a reference to the land of Israel, right? Where we reside. It says, and it, referring to this little horn, waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and the stars to the ground and stamped upon them, right? So just a metaphor referring to him taking us out. Remember, Joseph had that dream way back, and you see that reference being used oftentimes. Even later on in the chapter Daniel, the 12th chapter of Daniel, where it talks about us being like the host of heaven, like the stars, those that turn many to righteousness, right? Those that be wise. So going into him bringing down God's people, right? As we're going to read in the history in Maccabees. But like I said, Daniel's prophesying this before it happened. Remember, during Daniel's time, the majority of us were taken into the Babylonians at this point. This wouldn't happen until some time later. It says in verse 11 now, yeah, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, going into what we call the Feast of Dedication. The full name of this holy day being the rededication of the altar, right? Talking about the altar of burnt offering. We just talked about this. We reviewed this during the Tuesday class we just had. We were talking about this, right? It says, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. It says, and post was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. So showing that this little horn would have victory over us, you know, what we had set up to serve the Lord. Let's go now in the same chapter 4. We read from 9 to 12, right? Let's jump over now to 23. So now Daniel chapter 8 and verse 23, where it gives the understanding of what we just read. It reads, "And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full," going into when the Greeks are coming out of favor, because as we see, the Romans are going to be the next ones up. They weren't up in there yet, but the Greeks still had their rule, but it was falling apart. Like the scriptures tell us, like Christ told us, any king divided against itself should not stand. Because you go throughout the Greek Empire, not only did you have the dynasties going against each other, from the Seleucids to the Ptolemies, which we're going to be reading about mostly now, but even within their own dynasties, you had conflicts, right? So it says, "A king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up," referring to this Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Who he fancied himself this, he gave himself that name, meaning God manifest, right? Meaning he took on that name and said, yeah, I'm like God, I am the most high God on earth. Hence in taking on that name, which that's what that meant. So him and being lifted up in pride is being described here. It says, "And by his power and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people," right? So that's what those stars were talking about, we said before. But look at what it says. He shall be mighty, but not by his own power. So what this lets us know is that while men have power on the earth, there's always a power behind them. Even if they're not righteous, if they're wicked, the Most High always has power behind any rising and falling of a rulership, whether it be our rulership and righteousness when we had it, or the musical chairs that nations have played, even the ones that are in power right now, there's even a power behind them. The scriptures tell us that the Most High, he raised up a nation and bring it back down. He'll let the next one come into power and give them their time in the sun, and then he'll be the one to bring them down as well. Because if any nation sins or transgresses, you automatically put a shelf life on your kingdom or your rulership, right? So now reading on, it says, "And shall destroy the mighty and the holy people." Verse 25, Daniel chapter 8, verse 25, "And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart." So talking about him being lifted up and talking about having craft to prosper in his hand, right? So not only did he have power behind him, right, which is like spiritual wickedness, but also going to him being like employing statecraft, as far as saying one thing and doing something else, trying to use different allegiances, different techniques, different means to take advantage not only of the other Edomites that he fought against, like the Ptolemies, but especially him trying to fight against us, where we were split, where he had one group of us that were supporting the Hellenistics, or the Hellenists, but in the other group that we're going to read about, which is the sons of Mattathias and those that followed them, that were against it, that wanted to maintain and uphold the Hebrew custom, which is the law, statutes, and commandments. So he tried to use craft to pretty much put himself in an alliance with those who are people that were trying to sell the people out to the Greeks, which we go back to First Maccabees, we're going to read about them. So that's all this what this is talking about. That's why it says in the next part, "And by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but shall be broken without hand." Right? And that comes later on in the story. We won't read about that tonight. But later on in the story of Maccabees, it talks about him trying to come up against us and trying to come up against the temple. But then the Most High is going to pretty much bring him down and have him die a miserable death, right? A fantastic miracle of a death, right? Which even his men are going to take witness of and be like, "Oh man, we can't stand how bad he smells," right? Not to give away too many hints as far as what took place. And Shalom, Asia Crawford in the chat. Thank you for joining us. What is a Hellenist? When you read the scriptures, history actually, Hellenist or Hellenism just refers to the Greeks or the Greco culture, as far as their pantheon of gods, as far as their cultural practices and other things like that. That's what being a Hellenist is. That's where that name, even Helen, comes from. It's a woman's name. It comes from the Greeks, or Hellenism. Anytime you see that Helen or Hellenistic or Hellenic, other adjectives pertaining to Helen, it just means of or pertaining to the Greeks and how they do things. Hopefully that helps them. So I'll stop there in verse 25. Remember, this was a vision that Daniel had that wouldn't come to pass until the history that we're reading about right now. But just showing how this Antiochus Epiphanes is going to be an important figure, right? As far as all the things he's going to do against us. But then now he's going to be made a memorial of to show, look, you want to come against my people, even if I have judged them due to their wickedness. You want to come at them on the level like they came against them, trying to destroy them and trying to blaspheme me. And what I set up as far as my people set up as far as the temple and all the holy things that are in there, yeah, you got another thing coming. You have a future like his to look forward to. So back in First Maccabees chapter 1, we just read Daniel 8. I read 9 through 12 and 23 to 25, all to link with First Maccabees 1 and 10, which I'm going to read on now in verse 11. First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 11, it says, "In those days went there out of Israel wicked men." So before I read on, we'll just do the introduction for this, but I'll share my screen again. This is from just Wikipedia, right? If you go down to the bottom, at least of this article, you can get the primary sources as far as what source the information is coming from, talking about this Antiochus IV. So he's an actual person in history, right? Not only do we see the record of him being here in his primary source, the Bible, which most folks don't consider the Bible a primary source, but even you go into the records of other nations, you'll see that, yeah, they acknowledge the line of kings that came out of these four generals that came out of Alexander as real people. So we're not just talking about fairy tales, we're talking about actual history. Things actually took place, right? From these rise and falls of empires to their conflicts, even to the miraculous things that took place against them and for us. All these things actually took place. But for the gainsayers, a lot of them probably have a hard time to accept that. But it's all good. We're going to preach the truth regardless. We're going to prophesy regardless. So now I'll just read the intro for this little horn that Daniel prophesied that now this book of Maccabees is talking about in retrospect. Now I'm just sharing my page again. So this is that same Antiochus from Wikipedia. So it says he was born in 215 BC November, and then died in December of 164 BC. The 160s BC are important because it's the time period that most of our story takes place in the first and second Maccabees in the Apocrypha, right? Just being that 137 years down from the time of Alexander. It says he was the king of the Seleucid Empire from 175 BC until his death in 164 BC. Notable events during Antiochus' reign include his near conquest of Ptolemaic Egypt. That's what we're reading about right here in this Maccabees. It says his persecution of the Jews of Judea and Samaria, right? Which goes into what we're going to read into as you read on here. And the rebellion of the Jewish Maccabees, really just the Jews or the Hebrew Maccabees, because when we say Jewish, that means like, oh, pertaining to the original. They were actual Jews, not those that call themselves Jews today. He says the son of King Antiochus III the Great, Antiochus IV's ascension to the throne was controversial, as he was seen as a usurper by some, right? I mean, he took it over who was supposed to get the throne. It was he wasn't the next person that was in the next line of succession, right? What they're referred to now is primogeniture, where they have certain rules that go into when it comes to a royal family. Who gets to rule next after one person's death? It says, after the death of his brother Seleucus IV, Philopator, in 175 BC, the true heir should have been Seleucus' son, Demetrius I. However, Demetrius I was very young and a hostage in Rome at the time, similar to how Antiochus was when he was younger. And Antiochus seized the opportunity to declare himself king instead, successfully rallying enough of the Greek ruling class in Antioch to support his claim. This helped set a destabilizing trend in the Seleucid Empire in subsequent generations, right? We always read about in the prophecy, as an increasing number of claimants tried to usurp the throne. After his own death, power struggle between competing lines of the dynasty, the ruling dynasty, heavily contributed to the collapse of the empires, right? They had a tone on themselves as far as why the Greeks fell apart and why they're different, same nation with different rulership. The Romans would be the ones to take them out eventually, right? Antiochus' often eccentric behavior and capricious actions led to some of his contemporaries to call him Epiphanes. Instead of Epiphanes, Epiphanes, which meant the mad, or like a madman. He's crazy. So he had his own people call him Epiphanes at a certain point, right? But none of that is as bad as what actually eventually happens to him. You read on in Maccabees. Like I said, outside of the scope of what we're reading tonight. We read about his end in 2 Maccabees, the 6th chapter. Oh man, it's rough. Just to show the Most High, while he may punish us as his people and love us, he can allow these other nations that had rule over us reign for a little while, but they want to really come at us hardcore beyond the judgment that's meet or right. The Most High can very easily just take these guys out, make a mockery of them, bring them down. And like I said, he's a glaring example of that. But let's continue on in the scriptures. Just wanted to read that history real quick. So let's go back to 1 Maccabees. Now we're in verse 11. I'll read verse 11 again. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 11. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So these were those of our people that were Hellenized, to use that word again, and you were following the Greco-Roman customs as far as were serving their gods, wearing their types of dress, doing their certain cultural practices, etc., etc. They were making a case to say, look, we've had sorrow all our lives until we started following what they do, right? They have a better way of doing things. Verse 12, so this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. And what are some of these ordinances that they did? Verse 14, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. So this is what they refer to as the gymnasium. Remember, the so-called white man who's alive now, he comes from these same people. These are a different kingdom, but they're the same nation of people. So it's in their spirit to revitalize a lot of these things. That's why we look at the West today. We're talking about America, Britain, France, Germany, all the countries that are part of the current beast, which is the 7 heads and 10 horns in the vision, right? Talking about America and all her allies that are part of the EU, mostly. It shouldn't be a surprising thing that they embody and reintroduce these same things when it comes to their Olympics, their different games, right? Their gymnasiums, as far as their gyms and workouts, as far as, not saying it's a bad thing to work out, but the way they work out, where they're in the buff or in the nude, we see them carry on that same spirit where they may not go fully nude, but they get damn near close to it, right? Wearing loose skin type, outfits and things like that. And then oftentimes when they clean up and going into the gymnasium, they're walking around with nothing on, not covering their nakedness, which according to our law, we're supposed to always cover our nakedness, right? Not just be exposed like that. So now we have our people back during this time embracing that then. That's that place of exercise. It says in verse 15, and made themselves uncircumcised. See that? So now, the physical circumcision, which is in the law, right? Where we did this thing where on the 8th day, a male will have his foreskin cut off of his penis. But now, to be uncircumcised, to make yourself uncircumcised, the cutting off of the foreskin of the flesh, spiritually meant like cutting off the deeds of the flesh. It was something we did to show our covenant with God, started by Abraham, to show that closeness we had to him We want to take on a more spiritual nature. So that was a law we did physically, but it had that spiritual meaning behind it. So anytime you see something like this, the uncircumcision, like in the New Testament, or making yourselves uncircumcised, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about more of a spiritual thing as far as us still taking on the ways of the flesh. And by following the ways of the heathen, the other nations, you're going to follow the ways of the flesh, right? They go hand in hand. So that's what it means here when it says they made themselves uncircumcised. So when we read that in the New Testament, when it talks about the circumcision of those of the uncircumcision, and those that grew up outside Judea proper, that Paul and other apostles were going out there to teach to, that were of our people that were scattered, the origins were during this time. This is where it goes back to. He says, they forsook the holy covenant or the contract that we made with the Lord to follow his commandments and joined themselves to the heathen. Remember, a heathen just means any nation is not of the 12 tribes. And were sold to do mischief, right? So we talk about selling out, right? You're talking about selling your soul. The way you do that is by what? Not keeping the commandments and what? Following something that goes outside the commandments, which means following the heathen. To show that, you can link this with 1 and 15. This is Proverbs. I'll get it real quick, and then we'll keep going with the story. This is Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 19 in verse 16. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 16, it reads, he that keepeth the commandment keepeth his own soul, but he that despiseth his ways shall die. His is talking about the Most High's ways, right? So if you keep the commandment, you keep your own soul. So people talking about, oh yeah, so-and-so didn't sell out, right? You want to be careful with that, right? Because there's levels of wickedness, right? If anything, folks that sell out for fame and fortune, whether it be the movie industry, the music industry, whatever, oftentimes, and most times, they weren't keeping the commandments to begin with. Or there's a degree to even do even more debauchery if they hadn't done it already, right? So people talking about, yeah, I didn't sell out, I didn't sell my soul, right? They just didn't go deep, but you still are in the world following so-called Christianity or following, something that's of man, not the truth, not the commandments. If that's the case, then you didn't have your soul to sell to begin with. They just tricked you into making you think that you were doing the right thing. But really all you're doing was just went from bad to worse. That's all what happened there. And we were making reference to that song earlier during the Sabbath service, the song by Roddy Ricch that was real popular a couple of years back. He's talking about, I will never sell my soul. He's singing that during the chorus. Knowing the truth was like, wait a minute. You're not keeping the Sabbath, the holy days, dietary law. Your soul's already gone. Sorry to inform you, but yeah. But anyway, that was Proverbs 19 and 16. Back to 1 Maccabees chapter 1. Let's read on to verse 16 now. This is going into what we read about on the, not only in Daniel's prophecy, but also what they had in the Wikipedia article. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 in verse 16, it says, now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt. So that was part of that Ptolemaic dynasty. Remember the map? You had the green part, it was humongous. Then you had the part that was Ptolemy's that was orange. He was saying, you think you'd have enough, right? You got the biggest land out of all the different generals. But he said, no, I want his too, right? True to form. That he might have dominion of 2 realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude of chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy, right? So employing land and water means of warfare, right? To where he's got the soldiers with elephants, right? They're like the tanks back then, right? And he's got naval ships in the waters too. Because Egypt, a good portion of Egypt was by the water, right? Where the Nile River opened up. That was a major trade port, right? And that city, Alexandria, that Alexander named after himself, that would end up transitioning into the Roman hands at a certain point. But that was like a major city, a major throughway where a lot of trade took place. So not surprising that Antiochus, even though he might have had more land, he wanted something precious like that Alexandria city that was under the Ptolemies. It says, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. So this particular Ptolemy that was part of that succession going down, it says that he fled, and that many were wounded to death. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. After that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. He returned again in the 140th and third years. We got a little bit of time that went by, from 137 to 143. So about five or so years between that point and this point. It says, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. Remember the prophecy in Daniel against the pleasant land. He said the little horn will go towards the south, towards the north, and towards the pleasant lands. Now he said, oh, you know what? Let me come against God's people and go against their capital city, right? Since Adam took out Egypt and got all the riches from them. Well, really, it was his own people, but their rulership they had in Egypt. It says, and entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the gold altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels there. We're talking about this too during the class this week, as far as when you go into the tabernacle and the temple later on, how everything was situated, right? As far as where the candlestick was, where the table of showbread was, where the altar of incense was. So he went in there and took these things. So in our law, only the sons of Aaron are supposed to go in there. Not even other Israelites supposed to go in there. We got this heathen man going in here of Esau, right? The one the Most High hates. You read in Malachi and Romans as well. He's going up in here and just taking this stuff. So it just shows just how bad things have gotten when it comes to how we're being judged by the Most High. And he's allowing this man to do. Verse 22, it says, in the table of the showbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold and the veil, just that separates between the holy place and the holiest of holies, right? Even Aaron or the high priest of the sons of Aaron didn't go in there only one time of the year. When you read the scriptures, so he went in there too. The crowns and the gold ornaments that were before the temple, all which he plucked off. And he took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. He also took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made great massacre and spoken very proudly. So doing proudly and speaking proudly, right? All these things are very important because these things tie right into that prophecy that Daniel said that this little horn would do. Like we read in Daniel chapter 8 a little earlier. Therefore, there was great mourning in Israel in every place where they were. So the princes and elders mourned, the virgins and the young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. So all the things we would do, there'll be joyous, whether it be even in marriage or having children being born. These different things would be celebrations. These were not celebrations. These were actually sad times, times of mourning, times of heaviness, because how we're being delivered this horrible blow at the hands of the Greeks. 28, the land was also moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. It says, and after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute into the cities of Judah, who came to Jerusalem with a great multitude. Right? So we're talking about a long time that they've been warring and fighting against us and hurting us. 2 long years, I'm sure. And spake peaceable words unto them. What do we read about Daniel? What did he say? He shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, right? And with peace shall destroy many. Look at this. So this shows you, for any other nations, Esau included, the so-called whites, they want to be wicked and say, I'm going to do things on my own terms. And, heck with this God, all you're going to do is just fulfill the prophecy already laid out for you, right? When you want to go and do what you're supposed to do and respect the Most High's people or come against us, the Most High is going to know it before you even did it. He already wrote the script. And he's already got the judgment laid out for you, the worse you do. It says, what I'm referring to, you can just write down this verse. You can lead this with verse 30, but this is Psalms 104, verse 14 and 15. If I can get someone real quick from the audience to read that from Baba Kushai. Psalms 104, 14 and 15. And then we'll continue on. Doesn't feel like an hour has gone by already, but
What you say, Psalms 104,
that's right.
15?
14 and 15.
Psalms 104, 14 and 15. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man.
Sorry about that. 105, 14, 15. Get those mixed up.
Psalms 105, 14 and 15. He suffered no man to do them wrong. Yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm.
See that? So that was told to Egypt way back when with Pharaoh. That goes for all the kings, right? That had their time to rule, and that the Most High allows that dominion over us as a punishment. So it just shows the Most High is always dealing with his people, Israel, to where even when he allows them to take us captive, that becomes a thorn in their side just from the jump. To where, yeah, while it's a judgment upon us for not keeping his commandments, it's a punishment upon them for causing us harm by taking us into captivity. Just showing the Most High never want us to be in captivity, but he will allow the nations to have us in captivity to teach us a lesson or teach us lessons, plural. But they're pretty much judged already, dead in the water already, once they come and take us over. But really, ultimately, they can't last. Their empire can't last because the laws they set up, if they're not the laws that the Most High follows, like I said earlier, it's already a limited time for their rulership anyway. See, it's going to be a serious hurt piece for this Antiochus. For all of them, but especially him. He's going to go above and beyond when it comes to how they oppressed our people. Back to 1 Maccabees chapter 1, now in verse 31. It says, and when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. It says, but the women and children took they captive and possessed the cattle. So they destroyed the different property and captured our women and children and had them captive, and also took our cattle too. It says, then built they the city of David with great and strong wall, with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. So they took out our chief city, the city of David, right, which is, we know, adjoined to Mount Zion, where Jerusalem was, and made it their own, right? That's what you do when you take dominion over a place, right? You'll take the chief places and then make them an outpost for yourself, right? We even did that back during our time. We were taking out different countries. It says we will set up garrisons in their land, right? But now the Greeks are coming into power. So that's what they're doing to us. It says, and they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. So put wicked people in this holy city, which was only supposed to be holy people of our nation there. They stored it also with armor and victuals, which means food. And when they had gathered together the spoil of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and so they became a sore snare or trap. For it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary and an evil adversary to Israel. See that? It says, thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers and became strange to those that were born in her, and their own children left her. So we talk about gentrification, right? The slow process of gentrification in these cities here in this modern day Babylon. Yeah, look at this. This is like accelerated, right? We're like, wait, this is supposed to be my town with my name on it. But I look around, I don't recognize these people anymore. These strange nations are all up in my city where I grew up. So this is the punishment of the Lord. This is the judgment of the Lord. We don't put him first. So if we read above, those men that were selling out, yeah, They play a big hand in why this was going down. It says her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. And had been her glory, as had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased. And her excellency was turned into mourning. So all the things she had that was for good have been flipped to now evil. Moreover, Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. Here comes the real vicious part, right? It's enough for us to be demolished as far as physically, as far as our means. But he's going to come at us as far as our mental and our spiritual. That all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yeah, many also the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. So he said, yes, we're all one, like the Greeks. I want you guys to follow what we're doing, right? So not this whole, freedom of religion. No, you're free to follow my religion. And if you don't, it's going to be a problem. 44, for the king had sent letters by messengers into Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple. So Leviticus 1-7, you can forget about it. Forget about all those offerings, those righteous offerings that were given to us by Moses and then established by Aaron and his sons after him. Now we're going to throw all that out. No more. It says that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days and pollute the sanctuary and holy people. Set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. And that is setting up all types of altars and groves, chapels of idols to celebrate their Greek false gods. Remember the I think last week we were checking out after we got back from camp. There's a particular scene from that 300 movie where you had their king Leonidas over the Spartans going to get approval from the ephors, which were like their wicked priests that they had. Seeing climbing up this high mountain to get to this temple they had set up to their false god Apollo, right? To go to seers, to go to the seers up on the mountain to get prophecy on what to do next. It's like we had in righteousness, but now they're corrupted with unclean spirits. But that movie depicts that in that part of that movie, in that 300 movie. We were just checking it out and breaking it down. But anyway, reading on, it says, verse 48, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable, all manner of uncleanness and profanation. So they did their homework. They said, oh, yeah, you guys do this foreskin thing with your boys? Yeah, stop that too, right? Because we don't want any remembrance of what you did before and why, that it ties you back to God. We want you to be dealing with our gods. Like he said, one people, right? Like that spirit of Babylon come back at Esau, as he's referred to as the daughter of Babylon, right? How they had the Hamites do that before during their rule with the one people, right? We see Esau during this time, but then also we see him during these times as well, trying to establish something similar. That's why in the prophecies it refers to this as Babylon the Great. They try to do what they did before with the Tower of Babel. Bring everybody under one banner, whereas the Most High wanted nations to go in different places. They could do trade with each other, but as far as their lands and their posterity, no, we intended for borders to be established where different nations can have their plots of land, with Israel right there in the middle, right, being in the promised land. That's what the Most High wants. But men in the flesh, they want to do the opposite. So it says, leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation. It says, to the end, they might forget the law and change all the ordinances, and whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, he should die. In the self same manner wrote he to his whole kingdom and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. So any city unmonitored. They want to make sure everybody was doing these wicked sacrifices. So this is a real bad time for us here, man. It says, then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor or for help. So we had to live underground, right? We had to hide, right, to still keep our laws, right? And then, if we were to come back into the land, we had to, kind of like blend in the populations. It became like we had to pretty much wage a guerrilla occupation against this foreign occupation now, where we had to put on one face when the heathen saw us, but then when the coast was clear, we can go and do what we would normally do behind closed doors. So we couldn't openly practice our culture. It says, verse 54, now the 15th day of the month Caslow in the 145th year, it set the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and built idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. So we have this prophecy in Daniel as well, where it talks about an abomination of desolation. I know there's some confusion because we see Christ mention this too, but think of it as like a prophetic echo. The same way you have the Babylon of old, and you also have Babylon the Great, and they follow that same spirit. You have the abomination of desolation that we're going to read about here that he does when it comes to the altar burnt offering. But then the abomination that caused desolation that goes even a step further, but in that same spirit, Christ is talking about is going to be what? After his time period, but it's in our history now. We're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which will take place a couple of decades after Christ's time. But we do read about Daniel making references to the abomination that caused desolation. It has a twofold prophecy where it's a horrible thing that he did, but then it's going to be even a more horrible thing that the Greeks' brothers, the Romans, going to do even after that. In case there's any confusion around that. So before I go on, let me just get these verses. Just have these as a reference. Go with 1 and 54, and then we'll continue on. This is in Daniel. Daniel chapter 9. In verse 27. So Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, it reads, what you read above, it goes into Messiah being cut off, but not for himself, which referring to Christ coming, right? Later on, even after the Greeks, because remember Daniel in his visions, he would see not only the empire that he was in, but then the empire after that, the one after that, even the one after that, even how it would fall for a little while, and how it would come back again. And I see here in the chat, we'll read about the feast of dedication right now. This is called Hanukkah, or Chanukah in the Hebrew, which means dedication, right? So what we're talking about is, and we read about it right now too, the altar of burnt offering, which is a holy device, like a holy grill, if you will, that we use to do transactions with the Heavenly Father, to communicate, if you will, with the Heavenly Father. We offer different things He blesses us with on this altar. But now, due to our people being wicked, the Most High allowed the Greeks to come into power, and in the time of their power, during his ruler, Antiochus Epiphanes, who ruled one of their branches, he came into our land and slaughtered many of us, and it took our holy altar burnt offering and other things. He's going to defile it, which we're going to read about there. So the feast of dedication is fully called the rededication of the altar, which means we're not going to read about it tonight, but we will when we do the closing service a week from now. But when you read on in the first Maccabees, the first 4 chapters especially, they talk about how we came into power and we were able to pretty much do away with the old altar burnt offering that was defiled by the Greeks and make a new one. It was done by the sons of Mattathias, who was Judas, Simon, Jonathan, and their brethren, and those that followed them. And they could do it because they came from that family, the sons of Aaron, so they could be the ones that handle those holy vessels. But that's the short version. But as we read on, we're going to get into the details that lead up to all those things happening. But once again, Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, it reads, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." Right? So that's Daniel 9 and 27. You could also read this being mentioned too in Daniel chapter 11, which is a lot of prophecies in Daniel chapter 11 that talk about Persians and the Medes, followed by the Greeks, and even the Romans giving them trouble. But this is what we're talking about. I'm just going to read verse 31. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 31, where it says, "An army shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." Right? Or that astonisheth. Right? And then another one in Daniel. This is Daniel chapter 12, in verse 11 also. So Daniel chapter 12 and verse 11 reads, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, it shall be 1,290 days." So that time period, when you go into, it's interesting, you add the number of that, it adds up to 12. Because the real one, it says, "Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days." Which is another dispensation of time also, which you add those numbers up, they add to 12 also. Just showing how, no matter whether it's good or bad going on in the earth, it's all in the Most High's watch, right? He can control how things go, how fast they go, who does it, who has power to do it, et cetera, et cetera. You're welcome for that clarification. I know it's too long to the read version, but hopefully you can come back this time the following week. We're going to be going into the closing history of this day. Right now, it's going to the first part that leads up to why we keep the Feast of Dedication holy. You can write these verses down as well. We won't read them, but just write them down. Just references that Christ makes to this abomination that causes desolation. Remember, you had the one that the Greeks did, but then you had the one that follows suit that goes even worse, which says the destruction of Jerusalem that happened after Christ's time, just a couple of decades later after the time he prophesied. Remember, when Christ did his work, it was around the time of 30 AD, right? But what he was talking about what happened about 40 years after he would die and rise from the grave and then go back into the third heaven. You can write down Matthew 24, 15 and 16. Matthew 24, 15 and 16. Also Mark chapter 13 in verse 14. Mark chapter 13 in verse 14. Also Luke chapter 21, verses 20 and 21. Just as added references to the abomination that causes desolation. Let's go back to First Maccabees. Let's continue on. First Maccabees chapter 1. I read 54. Let me read on in verse 55. It says, "And burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law which they found, they burnt them with fire." It says, "And wheresoever was found with any the book of the testament, or if any consented to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. Thus did they, by their authority, unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. So they were coming down hardcore. We didn't keep their wicked holidays, as we call them. And we try to do anything that resembled God's righteousness according to the commandments. It says in verse 59, now the 5 and 20th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. So this idol altar, we go into the history. They had built pretty much an altar on top of our righteous altar that was dedicated to Zeus. And they sacrificed unclean animals on this thing, swine in particular, when you read the historical accounts. But this is this idol altar they put on top of the holy righteous altar, right? So it's just like, it's one thing to say, okay, you Israelites, you guys are going to be ruled by me. But it's like, yeah, I want to destroy anything that connects you back to your God, anything that you practice. And especially this, because the altar burnt off, like I said, was a chief place. It was the furthest point that regular Israel could go. But it's where Aaron and his sons would begin, where they were carrying on the Most High's work on their behalf, where it was like a major point we could do transactions with the Most High, right? For how we function as a people, whether we did good or whether we did bad, right? The altar burnt offering was the chief place of concourse of a spiritual nature, not just a physical nature, right? So it had a very high importance and still does, even though it's gone now. We'll establish it again in the kingdom as well as other things like the temple, etc., that were destroyed before. But now it's for us to remember or to think on these things spiritually and realize the importance that they serve spiritually. So we don't think that, oh, without this place, we can't serve God. Without this device, we can't serve God, right? If anything, they just exemplify. If anything, they just brought together that connection we had with God. We'll talk about this again, too. We go back to the Sabbath service when we read on in 2 Chronicles. We just did 5 and 6 a couple weeks ago. You can find that on our YouTube channel. But we're going to chapter 7 and 8 next Sabbath coming up. So definitely stay tuned for that. We'll go more into those details. We've set these up as along with the temple during the time of Solomon's reign, which was some centuries before this history period. It says in verse 60 now, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised. They even killed women with newborn sons that they had circumcised on the 8th day, like it tells you in Leviticus chapter 12, 1-3. And they, hanging the infants about their necks, and rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves to not eat any unclean thing. That's the book. Skip a verse. No, I didn't. I'll read 61 again just in case. They hang the infants about their necks. So infants hanged, right? Just consider that sight. It's bad. It's a horrible thing to look at anybody hang, but imagine an infant. And rifled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them. Once again, howbeit many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing, wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with the meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died. So they died in their righteousness. They said, you know what? You're going to put me to death for these things? Well, so be it. I'll still obtain a better resurrection, right? Death isn't the end for us. The Most High will remember and record that we stood against his wickedness, right? But can we do more to defend ourselves against these attackers, these strangers that are coming to try to stamp us out? Let's find out as we read on. So now we go to chapter 2. We're going to read about those that are going to resist this force of the Greeks coming in to destroy us inside and out, destroy us spiritually, mentally, physically. First Maccabees 2:1, it says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. Right? So for 2:1, it says he's he's a priest of the sons of Joarib. So it's a family of Aaronites, or the people that come from Aaron, right? So Most High made an everlasting covenant with Aaron and with his son Eleazar, right? And then Phinehas, you read about the covenant between Aaron, Eleazar, then trickling down to even Phinehas, a father, son, grandson combo, but then going into the family of Aaron going forward, that they would serve that purpose to work within the temple, right? In the circuits of the temple. So they were descendants of one of those families, which was Joarib, also spelled Jehoarib. You just write this verse down just as a record when it comes to this particular name, because that's why we have the chronicles and the scriptures to keep track of the particular family line. Even though we've been far removed and have our records destroyed in these latest captivities, at least the Spirit can show us the way we can be reminded of who we are as a people. So this is in First Chronicles. First Chronicles, chapter 24. It's 24 or 23. Like I'm looking at it, but I can't see it. Okay, here it is. So in First Chronicles 24, in verse 1, let you know it's talking about the divisions of the sons of Aaron, right? But then you jump down because it says they cast lots to say what lot will go to which family to do certain works when it comes to the tabernacle and then the temple later on when they would build it under the reign of Solomon, right? When they cast lots for their family, it says here in First Chronicles 24, in verse 7, First Chronicles 24 and 7, it says, now the first lot came forth to Jehoarib, the second to Jediah, right? So this Jehoarib is the same of Joarib that we're reading about in First Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 1. But that was just First Chronicles 24 and 7, just to show that name. It showed that their parentage wasn't to be questioned. But you read it above in this chapter, it goes into how they arranged the Levites as a whole, but also the sons of Aaron to do the work of the temple. And this, when you read in verse 3, it was during the time of David. They were pretty much dealing with those descendants of Aaron during his time, just to make sure that they were set up accordingly. But First Maccabees 2, now I'm in verse 2. First Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 2, where it reads, in those days arose Mattathias, son of John, I read this already, and he had 5 sons, Johanan called Kettus, Simon called Thasai, Judas, who was called Maccabeus. So this book of the Maccabees is named after Judas, as he was the prominent of the 5 sons, right? But Maccabeus was his surname, right? You go into that word, it means hammer, because he would deliver hammer-like blows to the enemy. So they were referred to as the Maccabees as a whole, but really it pertained to this Judas, Maccabeus. Eleazar, so that name came back again, right? As that was their ancestor, called Abiram, and Jonathan, whose surname was Epis. So at least 5 sons, Judas, Simon, and Jonathan, are going to have a name amongst the 5. But when we read the other stories of the Maccabees, it's going to focus in on their story in particular. And what they would do when they would have the reins of rulership when it came to the rebellion against the groups. Verse 6, when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there where it was delivered unto the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers. So he's saying, woe is me that I have to live to witness these atrocities happening to our people and to the holy temple of God that we've been given charge of, right, as his priests. Verse 8, her temple has become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets. Her young men with sword of the enemy. with the sword of the enemy. What nation have not had a part in her kingdom and gotten of her spoils, right? So it's showing over the histories, we've gone in captivity under every nation you can think of under heaven, right? We will follow the Most High, then go against the Most High, the Most High raise up a nation, take us into captivity to punish us. Then we have a Savior come into power, wake us up, promote us, or recommend or encourage us to turn back in the right direction. That will happen for a while. Then we go straight again. And Most High raise up another nation, take us into captivity, right? Over and over, this would happen. And thank goodness, this is the last time. It's the last captivity. We won't be going into captivity anymore after this last deliverance that we're going to have by the hand of Christ and his host. But this is Daniel chapter 9 and verse 12. There's a quick link to link with chapter 2 and verse 10. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 12, where it reads, "And he hath confirmed his words which he spake unto us, and against our judges that judge us, by bringing upon us a great evil. For under the whole heaven have not been done as have been done upon Jerusalem." See that? Just to show, yeah, other nations going into captivity, sure, right? People say, well, everybody's gone into slavery, right? It's just, it just comes with the territory when you have dominion, yeah, but not like how the children of Israel, right? It's not like we're trying to do some plantation Olympics here. We just want to make sure we acknowledge the truth of the matter. So we'll get gainsayers to push back. Like, everyone goes into captivity, everyone goes into slavery, right? We try to minimize what's been done and is being done to us. Back at First Maccabees chapter 2. Now I'm in verse 11. "All her ornaments are taken away. Of a free woman, she is become a bond slave." Interesting. It's kind of like a parallel to what it says in Galatians, right? When it talks about comparing us to Sarah versus Hagar, right? Hagar being the bondwoman, and then Sarah being the free woman, right? It says, "And behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty, and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it," right? Referring to other nations, right? "To what end, therefore, shall we live any longer?" So, like a prayer, but also like a complaint, also a lamentation, if you will. Look at the state of affairs. It says in verse 14, "Then Mattathias and his sons rent their clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn very sore." Right? So, like I said before, Mattathias, he comes from that line that comes out of Jorib, one of the sons of Aaron, right? One of the descendants of Aaron. You go into their family line. It says, "In the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to revolt, came into the city of Modin to make them sacrifice. And when many of Israel came unto them, Mattathias also and his sons came together, and answered the king's officers and said to Mattathias on this wise, Thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore, come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like as all the heathen have done, yeah, and the men of Judah also. And so does remain in Jerusalem. So shalt thou in thy house be in the number of the king's friends. And thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards." So they'll do this routine. We read this throughout the Maccabees, where they'll try to appease those that be in authority in these different cities, right? They'll say, "Oh, you're someone who has a name, who has a recognition, who has rapport with the people, right? Let's see if we can get this person to come on our side and let them be the one to spread the gospel, if you will, to the rest of the people, right?" So that's what we're trying to do here with Mattathias, recognizing him as being, having a name in Modin amongst the sons of Aaron, right? Him being an elder priest and having sons who are of age. It says in verse 18, now therefore come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like as all the heathen have done, and the men of Judah also, and so does remain at Jerusalem, so shalt thou and thy house be in the number of the king's friends. And thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. We were just talking about this in the Sabbath service, right, Con? As far as is it worth it being a friend of the heathen, of the enemy, right? They'll give gifts and say, hey, look, take these gifts, right? And then our people, not knowing any wiser, will think, oh, they like me. They really like me, right? They got my back. Hey, my own people don't give to me, but at least they give to me, right? So this is where the bribe comes in. Or I should say the attempt at a bribe. We're going to see what Mattathias does in response in verse 19. Then Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice, to all the nations that are under the king's dominion, obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers, and give them consent to his commandments. Yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken unto the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left, right? So now Mattathias is making a stance, saying, look, we know these guys' track record. Everywhere they go, they got the rules of those people to say, okay, just don't kill us. Don't kill any more of us. All right, we'll follow your Zeus. We'll follow your Hera. We'll follow your Apollo, your whoever else he wants to follow, right? We'll worship your God. We'll eat how you eat, dress how you dress. Just don't kill us. Mattathias said, nope, we're gonna draw the line. We're not gonna do it. But now check this out, verse 23. Now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar, which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. So as he's making this stance to say, we're not going to do it, here comes a sellout of our people with the offering, right? To say, oh, here's the offering to the Greek god, right? Because remember, going through the history, you had some of our people that were willfully being Hellenes or Greek-like, right? So you had these splits, and some of them were even of the priests too. We're going to read about them also, right? That are willfully following the Greco-Roman, the Greco customs. See the Roman customs, yeah. Romans are here too, but they're up and coming. So it says, which thing when Mattathias saw, he was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. So he couldn't contain himself. He's like started shaking, just like, are you kidding me? Like he's doing this now. He was filled with the righteous zeal, right? Righteous anger, righteous retribution, right? So he came upon him. He's an older man too, showing you that even though he was older, he could still handle himself, right? Ran upon this man and slew him right there on the altar. Also, the king's commissioner, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time. In the altar, he pulled down. So he wasn't just stopping with that guy. He was taking out the people the Greeks had set up too. And that altar they set up, that wicked altar, he took that down also. It says, thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like as Phinehas did unto Zambri, the son of Salem. So a little call back into history. So with 1 and 26, we can connect it with Numbers. Numbers 25. So it goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, going to chapter 25. You can write down 26. Verses 6 down to 9 pretty much has the whole event. Numbers 25, verses 6 to 9. The whole chapter is good, but just 6 to 9 is a good link up. What was talking about in chapter 2 and verse 26 of First Maccabees. So Numbers 25 and 6, it reads, and behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, right? Because in the law, we have to take wives of the strange nations. It says, and when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, so doing this in a public setting, doing something that's clearly against the law, like we see here, his brother giving the offering to an idol. It's almost like that same spirit that was on Phinehas, it was on Mattathias, right? To be filled with zeal, and then to just go in, as they used to say, ham, right? At the reference pork, but hard for the Most High's righteousness, you say. It says, he rose up from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly, for the plague was stayed in the children of Israel. And those that died in the plague were 24,000. It's a good thing he did what he did when he did it, because it would have been even worse had he not, right? To stay this plague as far as what was going on here. We see this happen other times too, but one of Israel does something that goes against the law. Most High smites us with a plague, where it requires us, one of us, to stand up and go, who's saying doing the thing that's wicked? We got to stop him, right? And we see here, Phinehas stood up for the cause, right? He answered the call, as they say, right? Who was it? The little girl from Game of Thrones? You of house so and so, you refused the call. And you over there, you refused the call, right? So Phinehas answered the call. And as you read on, it goes into how it was made an everlasting covenant with him and with his house for this righteous thing that he did here, right? But that's what is being referenced here in First Maccabees. Let's read on. This is verse 27 now. First Maccabees 2 and 27, which links with, we read Numbers 25, 6 to 9, it links with First Maccabees 2 and 26. Now we're in verse 27. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintain the covenant, let him follow me. Kind of makes you think of Moses too a little bit, during the golden calf situation. He said, who's on the Lord's side? And it says 3,000 Levites came to Moses, like, we are. Moses said, fall on them. Those were people that were dealing with the golden calf, right? That kind of reminds you of that. That's kind of reminds you of that part a little bit. So it says, so he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. Because once they made this thing, they got to go in guerrilla mode, right? They got to go underground. So no word's going to get out there. And whoever else that is a sellout amongst Israel is going to go run, tell the Greeks. But at the same time, they know that whoever is on point, who might be keeping the laws but on the sneak tip, they're going to find them. That's what happens, right? They're going to find them and go, yo, we're just like you. You know what? We want to stand for the Most High. We want to stand for the commandments. We don't want to do what the Greeks have us doing. So it's like a very bold and decisive gesture to separate, the men from the males, right? The righteous men of Israel versus the males of Israel who want to follow the Greeks. And it serves just that purpose. As we read on, it says, then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there, both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore among them. At least they're on their home stretch, they're on their home turf. So who knows their land better than them, right? That's the one thing that anytime you have a smaller group being invaded by a larger group in any time of history, at least the smaller group has the home court advantage, where they know the nooks and crannies, they know how to get around where they live. And that's like the harder part for the stronger, invading force that has more weapons, more soldiers, etc. So they're using what they got. But ultimately, they have the Most High behind them, which is going to be the real thing that separates them. He gives them the advantage. It says, now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem in the city of David, that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were going down into the secret places in the wilderness, they pursued after them, a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them and made war against them on the Sabbath day. Check that out. So on the Sabbath day, Friday, Sunday, and Saturday, Sunday, the day when we would rest, they're making war against them. Because remember, we see with Antiochus and how they're going to fight against us. They're saying, look, it's not just a matter of you paying us tribute. You got to stop all your practices, all things you do. So they did their homework on us. So they did homework on all the other people that they conquered. They say, okay, here's their festival days, here's their eating practices, here's their this, here's their that, right? We got to hit them where it hurts. We got to hit them when we know that they'll have their guard down. That's what they said. Oh, bet. Let's get them on a Sabbath day when we know they're resting, right? And they can't do any work. 33, and they said unto them, let that which you have done hitherto suffice. Come forth and do according to the command of the king, and ye shall live. So they're throwing out a supposed olive branch, right? Saying, look, we know there's been a situation you guys resisted, but look, you just surrender now, no more harm will come unto you, right? And we're hoping that that's what they're actually going to do. They're actually going to live up to. But like we read in Daniel's prophecy, right? Through peace, he shall slay many. So it can be trusted? I don't think so. But let's see. It says, but they said, we will not come forth, neither will we do the king's commandment to profane the Sabbath day. It says, so then they gave them the battle with all speed. So these brothers and sisters said, look, we're going to keep the Sabbath, and we're not going to follow the king's commandment to defile ourselves. It says they gave them the battle with all speed. It says, howbeit they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped the place where they lay hid, but said, let us die in all our innocency. Heaven and earth shall testify for us that you put us to death wrongfully. So they rose up against them in the battle on the Sabbath, and they slew them with their wives and children and their cattle, to number of 1,000 people. So, sad situation, but what they said is true because we're reading about it now, and we can remember and acknowledge that yes, they stood boldly against these profane Greek attackers, even though it meant their lives, right? So we could say they did well, right? By resisting the temptation of the Greeks, their lives being threatened, even still, they resisted unto death. Like it says in Ecclesiastes 4:26, strive for the truth unto death, and the Lord shall fight for thee. So they would obtain a better resurrection. Like we always say, we either do well or do better when it comes to this truth, right? If we endure spiritual affliction and the heathen don't lay hands on us on our life here, we do well. If we resist temptation and the heathen decide to lay hands on us, arrest us, lock us up, torture us, whatever they want to try to do to us, kill us, we do even better. We attain an even better resurrection. So the worse they do, the better it is for us in the end. We read this, and the hope is that we believe this and embrace this if it comes to that, you see. So they did well, but now, as we're going to read, Mattathias and his sons and those with them are going to try to do better if they try this tactic again, right? Because if they all do what they did, the Greeks will say, oh, Sabbath day attacks. Keep them coming. Keep them rolling. Hopefully they'll all do the same thing. Verse 39, now when Mattathias and his friends understood thereof, they mourned for them right sore. One of them said to another, if we all do as our brethren have done, and fight not for our lives and laws against the heathen, they will now quickly root us out of the earth. And they're right. Because, like I said, when it comes to the heathen, especially Esau, right, the wickedness knows no bounds. They'll go all out. At that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against him, neither will we die all as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. So you know what? We're going to try a different method, right? Because we know how the Greeks are, right? Not to put shade on our brothers, but if they're going to keep trying to do this tactic, we can't do it. It'll kill us all off. So if they try to do it to us, we're going to fight against them, right? On the Sabbath day. If they come at us on the Sabbath day, we're still going to fight. So this is like that wisdom that was always there, but we see it kind of came to the forefront of Christ, right? It is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. This would be an example of doing well on the Sabbath day, right? It's not so much like, oh yeah, we're willfully going out there and fight on the Sabbath. No, if it comes to that, yeah, we'll defend ourselves, we'll fight. Just like now, where it may not be, as a grim of a circumstance. If you do something outside of our knowledge, like get medicine or buy things or do something on the Sabbath to help out our brother and sister, yeah, we'll do that, right? But it's not something that we just do just because, right? Only if the situation called for it. Because the whole goal is like Christ said, Sabbath is not made for man, but man for the Sabbath. Have that reversed. Have that backwards. The Sabbath is not made for man. Sabbath is made for man. Man is made for the Sabbath. Right the first time. Stop all in my head. Right. So it's not so much like, oh, the Sabbath is here, just shut everything down, let them kill us. But no, Sabbath was made for us to benefit us. So the idea is to use wisdom on the Sabbath when situations arise like this, or could be just, not something as high stakes, like a man's lamb falling into a ditch. You don't want to be in there all day. Something could happen. You can, starve in there, or another animal will come and take them. So go in there and get the land. Even though it's work, you're preserving life, the life that you have that you have care over, right? So this is a good example of that here. I'm just making reference to Matthew 12, if folks are watching this for the first time and don't really know what I'm getting at. But Matthew chapter 12 goes into this in detail. There's a back and forth between himself and the Pharisees who try to falsely accuse him and his disciples of doing work on the Sabbath when they were picking corn because they had necessity of coming from a long journey. It wasn't a thing they would normally do to go out there and pick corn on the Sabbath. It was something they did because they came from a long journey and needed something to eat. And then Christ gives them examples in the Old Testament where they did that too, to give them that understanding, or hopefully to expound the understanding upon them as far as how to operate on the Sabbath and still be considered within righteousness.
I have a few scriptures, but hold them until you almost finish. More so, those who didn't fight, because we know in part, we prophesy in part, and this is not the people that we speaking of that didn't fight on the Sabbath. They're not exempt to, know in part and prophesied, and we know in part, prophesied in part. So they were not excused from that verse right there, right? To fight for the temple of the Most High is grand, and it's very good to do so. Just like we saw Judas Maccabeus did it, right? But more so, we gotta fight for the temple that really matters, which is us. We are the temple of the Most High. And this was the point that Christ was trying to make all throughout in his teaching. That yes, the temple that took 46 years to build is important, but more important is us that represent the true temple where the Spirit of the Most High dwells. So if we understand that, we shall fight for it and pray for the Most High to send us strength to fight to defend it. But not fighting for it is just that we don't get the true picture of how we represent the temple of the Most High.
Well put. If you guys want to write a verse, Matthew 12, 1 through 13, is that whole exchange that Christ has with those trying to falsely accuse Christ and his disciples of breaking the Sabbath day. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Khan, because it's kind of what I was referring to earlier, too, about the altar burnt offering, the rededication of the altar, right? We don't have the altar now, but we function very similarly when it comes to the altar when we exchange with God, as that was used as a means of communion, transaction with Heavenly Father, where the Israelites would bring different offerings to the sons of Aaron who do the work of doing the offering. We still do that now, even in a spiritual form, even though we've been scattered different places. Throughout the Americas, we can still remember and acknowledge the altar burnt offering's importance on a spiritual level when it comes to how we do exchanges for the Most High. We read it during the service as far as loving thy neighbor as thyself, right? You do this, you fulfill the whole law. So we may have an altar burnt offering, but helping out your brother and sister right? And loving the Most High with all your heart, soul, and mind, the two great commandments, right? You do that, and you pretty much have fulfilled that altar burnt offering what you did before. Right. So it's beautiful how it all connects, it all comes together. In First Maccabees 2, now I'll read 41 again. It says, at that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against them. Neither will we die all as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. Right? I remember if you look up the Assyrians, it comes from the word chasad. I guess I'm not sure to say plural, but it means like the graceful ones. Right? You go into the root of that word, right? So it says that they were mighty men of Israel, even all as such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. Also, all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them, and were a stay unto them. Right? So word got out that they stood against the Greeks at that outpost in Modin. So like we said before, others are coming to their aid. Others are saying, "Oh, I'm not the only one." Right? Let me join forces with them so that we can be a force to defend ourselves against these Greeks that are trying to take us out. So the Most High is adding unto them, somewhat similar to, even though it's it's kind of an internal battle. I'm thinking about David fleeing from Saul, right? In the cave of Adullam. It says how the Most High sent men to him too that were, distressed, that were in doubt, or that were, I think it says they were indebted, that they were distressed and discontented, and it became like a small unit or a small force. They were kind of living in the caves and on the run too from Saul and his army, right? So similar dynamic, but the opponent, I think, was a bit different, right? But the situation between David and Saul was more of an internal conflict. But here we have us against the Greeks, right? The priests and those that follow the priests against the Greeks. It says, also all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them and were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces and smote sinful men in their anger and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for succor. Right? So taking even at their own people that were sellouts, saying, look, we can't have any of you guys out here acting like this, wearing these clothes, dressing like the Greeks, talking like the Greeks. No, we're not going to have it in Israel. Right? Now, we're under grace now, so now we just more so get the verbal warning. But they were doing, words and deeds, right? Like read about it being somewhat hardcore, even during like Nehemiah's time, right? When Nehemiah was helping to reestablish the temple after we came out of captivity. We held into some bad habits while in captivity, and Nehemiah had to tell them, like, look, come back here again to sell on the Sabbath, to break the law. I'm going to lay hands on you, right? And the equivalent of, I'm going to jack you up. I'm going to put my paws on you, right? Pick the slang, whatever part of the city, whatever part of America you're from, you get the idea. But that's what they're doing here, right? They're forcefully saying, look, you got to stop this. Reading on, it says, then Mattathias and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars. And what children soever they found within the coast of Israel uncircumcised, those they circumcised valiantly, right? So they had their courage in the Most High that what it was the right thing to do, and that even though we may have been dealing with some post-trauma, what they did to our women that circumcised their boys, we're still going to do it for them, right? And then protect them going forward, even though we may be outmanned, outmaneuvered, out reinforced, if you will. They're going to stand for the truth, stand for the Most High, because even they may, have more against us, we still have the Most High on our side, which can easily level the playing field, as it's going to. They pursued also, in verse 47, they pursued also after the proud men, and the work prospered in their hand. So I like this as a reversal to in Daniel's prophecy, it talks about prospering and handed out to Antiochus. Now we have a reversal where it's prospering in our hand, right? So the Most High is not fighting for us. Even the Most High would allow Antiochus Epiphanes to do a whole lot of things, especially against us. It says, verse 48, so they recover the law out of the hand of the Gentiles, and out of the hand of the kings. Neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. Now, when the time drew near that Mattathias should die, he said unto his sons, now had pride and rebuke gotten strength, talking about the Greeks coming to power, right? And really speaking to Antiochus in particular, right? As Daniel did years before. In a time of destruction and the wrath of indignation. Now, therefore, my sons, be ye zealous for the law and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers, right? So give this final farewell speech, enforcing his sons and those that were with them to be encouraged to pretty much pick up where he left off, right? Mattathias being an excellent leader, just to lead by example. So look, be willing to put hands on folks, put men to death, right? Fight for this thing as I'm old in years. He's going to call to remember, as it says in verse 51. Think about those that came before us. They had to do similar things when faced with similar fate. Call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in their time. So shall you receive great honor and an everlasting name. Sure enough, we'll read about them now to this day. Right? We have scriptures to remember the great things that they did against the oppression of the Greeks. And like I said, I can't say enough, but shout out to those before them that stood against, right? Shout out to those that didn't fight back, but then were killed on the Sabbath, because we can remember that. Shout out to the women that circumcised their boys on the 8th day still. And those babies, even as they were, it's horrible to even consider it, but just them being hanged even. Shout out to them for standing up for righteousness too, right? Because they'll be remembered forever. They'll have an everlasting name. Like we said before, when you're into the truth, we either do well or we do better, depending on how bad things may get. It says, verse 52, was not Abraham found faithful in temptation? Looks a little funny in the Old English. And it was imputed unto him for righteousness, right? So calling back to Genesis when it talks about Abraham being, that he believed in the Lord and was counted him for righteousness. So for verse 52, you can write down Genesis. Genesis chapter 22. And 9, where the event actually went down. He went to offer up his son Isaac. Genesis 22 and 9. For 1 Maccabees 1 and 53, it says, Joseph in the time of his distress kept the commandment and was made Lord of Egypt. That one you can write down Genesis. We're talking about Joseph going to Sabbath service earlier today as well, right? Genesis chapter 41. And verse 40, the whole section is 37 to 45, but verse 40 should hit the nail on the head. Where he was brought to a low degree. It was an easy thing for the Lord to take him in his low degree and then bring him back on top. So that wisdom goes a long way, even when it doesn't pay out its dividends at the moment that you expect. First Maccabees 154, Phinehas our father, in being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. So we got that story earlier for 1 and 54. But as far as the part about the everlasting priesthood, that's in Numbers 25 also. But not in 6 to 9, but that's a little bit down. Numbers 25 and verse 13. To link with the 2 and 54. Numbers 25 and 13. Keep saying 1, 2. First Maccabees 2 and 55. Jesus, for fulfilling the word, was made a judge in Israel. Right? This Jesus is referring to Joshua, the son of Nun, right? Jesus being a Greek way of writing the name Joshua, which comes from the Hebrew Yahushua, which means he saves or he is salvation. You can write down Joshua chapter 1. And verse 2. The whole chapter really good, Joshua 1 and 2, about him being given the command over the people at this point. And then for verse 56, back in 2 Maccabees, Caleb, for bearing witness before the congregation, received a heritage of the land, right? So him and Joshua alone were the ones who brought back the right report, saying that, yes, we could take those Canaanites out, which others made them afraid. So that's Numbers. Numbers chapter 14. You can write 6 all the way down to 10. Numbers 14, verses 6 to 10. It records this. So we didn't know these stories already. You want to pretty much be able to go back to these stories to read these things for motivation, right? Hence why Matthew is making reference to all these things to remind them, like, look, now is our time to step up or to stand up against tyranny, oppression, against them coming against us, just like our forefathers did before us. Now it's our time. So remember their stories. Remember how they fought valiantly and do the same. As now it's your time to carry on that torch. Then in verse 57, 2 and 57, David, for being merciful, possessed the throne of an everlasting kingdom. Right? So now it jumps forward to David. You can go to 2 Samuel. Second Samuel chapter 2 and verse 4. Interesting to use Saul's burial here to make sure Saul got a proper burial. Even though he sought after his life. Speaks to his character. Also in verse 58, First Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 58, Elias, for being zealous and fervent for the law, was taken up into heaven, right? So we can't forget about Elias or Elisha the Tishbite, right? That's in 2 Kings chapter 2. Verses 9 down to 11. Yeah, very few men, we can name on one hand pretty much, that didn't die a natural death, right? That were translated, him being one of them. So all these figures as motivators, folks we can look back to in our past to be motivated by. We see the strange nations around us, even this day. They'll always like to call back to certain people they come from. They say, yeah, we had this forefather that did this and did that, right? They might even take on that person's name, right? Kansamak, I know you like to mention that when you go travels, listen to the people talk and how they'll just talk about the history of their place where they live, right? They'll say, oh yeah, this person, this monument here was for this great man that did X, Y, Z. This is something they're much more conversant about, right? I guess this might be a thing that's like you tend to see a little bit more in Europe in general. You see here in the States a little bit too, but you try to see it to kind of taper off somewhat, but you'll see how other people will lean upon those that came before them and like make mention of them. Even if the stories that they remember aren't true, they'll still, wave those banners and wave them hard. So, with us, we're simply told, oh, you guys have slavery. You guys have those that, help resist slavery. But it's like, as great as those folks we may talk about and we learn about here in the West, went to school about, for all the goodness that they've done, right? But we can look at those that did so much more if we just knew what our nationality was and just start with slave ships and just start with, those that led slave rebellions, right? Like a Nat Turner or like a Gaspar Yanga down there in Central America, or a Denmark Vesey, right? Or you go to the islands, you got Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines. I remember taking a picture at Mo Bay that time, some years ago. Went down there with they had a monument there. I think his name was Sam. I can't remember his last name. I looked at my old pictures. They had a monument down there in Jamaica for a man there that led rebellions against the English. I just remember his first name was Sam, but his last name escapes me. But we're told to start there when it comes to our history. And sometimes they might even have a issue with doing that, depending on who that figure was. They actually were like, to hell with the Western oppression, hell with the Europeans trying to overthrow us and oppress us. They might even have an issue with that. But now knowing that we're the Israelites, that we're the Hebrews, and that the greatest men and women ever to walk the earth, we come from them. Oh man. Just think of the head start that gives us just up here when it comes to our way of thinking, our motivation. Right? And they can't have that. You see Antiochus, he said, look, I don't want you to remember anything that has to do with you being a Jew. You got to be everything, you got to walk, talk, dress, eat the Greek way, right? Because that'll do us a favor. That'll make it easy for us to conquer you. All right, got two more here. But of course, I'm sure Mattathias could have kept going down the list. But even these folks that he mentioned are heavy hitters. So we got in verse 59 of 2 Maccabees, Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael, or Misael spelled here, by believing were saved out of the flame, right? This is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? As far as that being their slave names. But here he mentions their Hebrew names, which you can link this with Daniel. Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, And you write down, where should we start? Where should we start? You can say from '19 all the way down to 25. Daniel 3:19 to 25. Where it tops at the very bottom, it says, when looked into the furnace that they had it blazing, they saw 3 of them in there, and nothing was wrong with them. And it says there was a 4th person there that was like the Son of God. So check out that deliverance, how awesome that is.
28.
Okay. 26 to 28, add that on as well.
I think 28 sums it up.
Okay, so Daniel 3 and 28. Go out for that. Stay in Daniel and go to chapter 6. So Daniel chapter 6, 18 to 23. Which links with First Maccabees chapter 2 in verse 60, where it reads, Daniel for his innocency was delivered from the mouth of God. So Most High sent help like he did for his friends to make sure those lions didn't eat him during the time he was cast in there, because he was cast in there wrongfully on some wickedness, because they passed all they knew that could jam Daniel up, where he said, look, I'm still going to serve my God, still pray to my God. And for that, they said, oh, let's throw him in the lion thing. They knew Daniel was always praying. They had to figure out a way to try to get him off his game, since he had favor with him because of his righteousness, right? I think it tells you too, after they took him out and they threw those that accused him in, once the king of the Medes and Persians was like, oh man, right? Darius gave him his props after witnessing, such a feat. Once he threw his accusers in there, it says that the lions fell upon him and tore them up instantly. So just showing you that how powerful the Most High is toward, he can even stop the mouths of lions, right? Terrible beasts. It's an easy thing for the Lord, right? So we're going to be men, beasts, the elements, right? Sun, moon, and stars. All these things are in the hands of the Lord. So that we've put the Most High first to follow his righteousness. The Most High can have these things bend to our will easily, right? But back in 2 Maccabees 2, like I said, we can spend extra time on all those figures. It says in verse 61 now, and thus consider ye throughout all ages that none that put their trust in him shall be overcome. So look at all that track record we got for all those men I just mentioned, and how they were able to overcome the odds that were stacked against them. Just as we have odds stacked against us now as we fight against these Greeks. It says, fear not then the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he's returned into his dust, and his thought is come to nothing, right? So let's be the fate for the sinful man, as we see in many Psalms, many Proverbs, right? So him reminding his boys of that. It says, wherefore you, my sons, be valiant and show yourselves men on behalf of the law, for by it shall ye obtain glory. So we obtain a glory It's not just through, feats of strength and conquering the enemy, but it's through observing the Most High's righteousness. Through that, we obtain all the things that, regular men of the nations attain. But for us, we have to put the Most High's law first and foremost. Only through that can we obtain the glory that really will stand the test of time. This 2 and 64 is very similar to 1 Kings 2, 1 and 2, the final salutations that David, as an old man, gave to his son Solomon to carry on the rulership after him. Right? Very similar salutation. So 1 Kings 2 and 1 says, "Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die. He charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of Yahweh thy power to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies as is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself." So that's 1 Kings chapter 2. 1, I read down to 3 to link with 2 and 64, First Maccabees. 1 Maccabees 2 and 65. "Now behold, I know that your brother Simon is a man of counsel. Give ear unto him always. He shall be a father unto you. And as for Judas Maccabeus, he had been mighty and strong, even from his youth up. Let him be your captain and fight the battle of the people." Right? I make these jokes sometimes. We see like when you have children, they take on like different characteristics, right? So with his boys, he knew his boys and knew like what their strong suits were. Not to say that's the only thing they could do, but just what they were known for. So I said, if we were to kind of put this in a high school scenario, it would be like Simon would be like the class president, right? And then like Judas Maccabeus would be like the captain of the football team. Those being like two key figures when it comes to the whole high school hierarchy, right? They were young. But once again, we see that as it goes on in the story, we're going to see that even Judas is going to be able to demonstrate counsel. We're going to see that Simon will be able to demonstrate mightiness in battle, even though they were known for the opposite. But just as far what they're known for as far as their baseline, right? What they tend to default to. Yeah, Simon was that man of counsel. Judas was that mighty and strong fighter. Right? Then as you read on in verse 67, "Take also unto you all those that observe the law, and avenge ye the wrong of your people." So keep adding to your ranks. We have some with us here, but let's keep building that momentum. Right? "Recompense fully the heathen, and take heed to the commandment of the law." So pay them back. That's what recompense means, right? It says, "So he blessed them and was gathered unto his fathers." So he gave him this final salutation and blessing. He was gathered to his fathers or his ancestors, right? That's what Abba means. It says in verse 70 to wrap up, "And he died in 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers at Modin, and all Israel made great lamentation for him." Right? So he was a man to be remembered. And as you read on in the 3rd and 4th chapters, kind of setting the stage for the Maccabees, starting off with Judas Maccabeus himself, but also his brother Simon, his brother John, his other brothers, and these other of Israel that want to still keep the commandments are going to have his back and going to be his fighting force. It's going to gain more and more momentum as they fight against the Greeks who are trying to persecute them. Now, to bring it to the Feast of Dedication, why we call it the Feast of Dedication, right? Because we get to the ends of chapter 4 in particular, which usually we'll do is we'll read chapter 1 and 2 for the opening night, and we'll read 3 and 4 the closing night. But definitely read it tonight and during this week, just to be familiar with the story, so you can be motivated. But by the time you get to the end of the 4th chapter, you'll see why we do it tonight and why we remember this day to begin with. Remember when we first started the service, I mentioned St. John chapter 10, verse 22 and 23. It showed our Lord and Savior. He kept the Feast of Dedication also, says he walked on Solomon's porch in St. John chapter 10. And he had an interesting exchange with the people, talking about him and his father being on the same accord, and what that meant. Literally said, "My father are one." It was misunderstood by many, but you read St. John chapter 10, you get that full story. But you read verse 22 and 23, it tells you that that conversation was during this time of the Feast of Dedication. But I can read this in 2 Maccabees real quick, just to kind of get because we read this on Tuesday. I'll read it again as far as this, so we know how many days we keep it and how to go about keeping it based on how they did it the first time. So we have a frame of reference. Well, in 2 Maccabees chapter 10, Second Maccabees chapter 10, verse 1 down to 9. It reads, 2 Maccabees 10 in 1, it says, "Now Maccabeus," referring to Judas, "and his company, the Lord guiding them, recovered the temple and the city." So we read 3 and 4 of 1 Maccabees 3 and 4. They're going through the details behind it. So even though you might know the end of the story, it's always good to enjoy the story as it progresses to reach that conclusion. But just so we are familiar with what we want to do between now and this time next week, when we keep this week holy, right? As this is the holy day that we're supposed to keep in righteousness compared to all the other wicked holidays, as brothers call them, that we see the other nations following and our people that follow them following, right? Big one being Xmas, right? It says, but the altars which the heathen had built in the open street, and also the chapels they pulled down, and having cleansed the temple, they made another altar, and striking stones, they took fire out of them, and offered a sacrifice after 2 years, and set forth incense and lights and showbread. So in chapter 1, we read that about that 925 day where they built the altar, the idol altar, right? An abomination that caused desolation. They were able to reestablish a new altar with new whole stones 2 years after that on that same day, so that the goodness of that day can be remembered instead of the horrible thing that was done on that day just 2 years previous, right? And I think according to scholars, when it was defiled, it was 167 BC, but this is in 165 BC. Check the time frame as far as the years. According to scholars, according to when we look at when the Greeks came into power, what year they were in as far as their rulership, etc. So it says striking stones took fire out of them. Just means like a flint stone, when you strike them and it has sparks come out. It says, and offered a sacrifice after 2 years, set forth incense and lights and showbread. So all the different things that were inside the holy place. Candlestick to our left, table of showbread to our right, altar incense in front of us. It says, when that was done, they fell flat down and besought the Lord that they might come no more into such troubles, but if they sinned any more against him, that he himself would chasten them with mercy, and that they might not be delivered into the blasphemous and barbarous nation. It's going to come up again too when you read on in first and second Maccabees. But also we read this too not too long ago when we did 2 Chronicles 5 and 6, when Solomon dedicated the temple first established. He had similar things he said, where he asked the Lord, no matter where we may be scattered to, no matter who or what hardship may befall us, right? Whether it be something of nature, something of the nations, right? We're led into captivity, that the Most High would have mercy upon our remnant and preserve us in the way. So we see him asking for a similar thing that Solomon asked for, kind of speaking at that time, but also speaking to the future of what future hardships we will face. So we're glad that Solomon, with his request, was granted, and on many occasions, as we know, it was granted here for these brothers as they were keeping this first feast of dedication. Verse 5 says, now upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again, even the 25th day of the same month, which is Caslu, right? I think you mentioned the name of the month, right? Earlier asked about what day it was of the month, and we got Lop Tuab online. He got the 25th day. So he used this verse to show the 25th day of this month. Verse 6, and they kept 8 days with gladness as in the Feast of Tabernacles. So it was an 8-day feast. So we come together tonight, also this same time next week, that same night, like we do on Tabernacles, the same day. Because that'll mark 8 days once the sun sets, the following week, Saturday, sundown. Remembering that not long before they had held the Feast of Tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains in dens like beasts, right? So living in tents, right? Dwelling in nature, right? Like we other congregations celebrated too, trying to get closer and closer to that essence of what it means to keep the tabernacles and really be out there with the Lord, acknowledging that without, fancy buildings and structures, that the Most High's tabernacle always dwells with us, no matter where we go. Verse 7, therefore they bear branches and fair boughs and palms also, so evergreen branches, right? Because, the other branches obviously aren't going to be bearing any type of foliage, not until the spring months. And sang psalms unto him that had given them good success in cleansing his place. They were ordained also by common statute and decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews. So still will be kept even as you go down to, and verse 9 just says the end of Antiochus called Epiphanes. Remember in chapter 6 goes into detail behind how he fell to show what Daniel's prophecy was talking about. But like I said, we won't read that tonight. But the 2nd Maccabees 6 goes into those details. But I'll not mention the beginning of the service. We'll close out with John chapter 10 and 22 and 23. And we'll open the floor for any other scriptures for the folks may have before we finish up. But this is St. John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, chapter 10 and verse 22. So St. John chapter 10 in verse 22, it reads, and it was at Jerusalem the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. It says, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So like it says, you read on, goes into Christ talking about how him and his Father are one, what that means, right? But it's letting you know that at this time that it was the winter time and they were keeping the feast of dedication. So Hanukkah, which comes from the Hebrew Hanukkah, ancient Hebrew, which means dedication. That's what we keep right now as Israelites that know this truth, right? This shows that our Lord and Savior himself kept it. So it's not just something that you mention Hanukkah. You usually mention Hanukkah in the world, they go, oh, isn't it a Jewish holiday? It's what the Jewish people do, right? It's like, well, they try to do it, but really it was what the Jews kept, the actual Jews. And us being the actual Jews, we can prove that with Deuteronomy 28 and I guess 26. We're supposed to keep this because we just read it. The whole nation of Jews is supposed to keep this day, right? And that's why we still keep it. So that's why we keep feast of dedication. And nowhere can you find anywhere where Christ told us to cut down a tree and to hang ornaments on it and to put lights on it and say, yes, celebrate the day of my birth. If it said that, then we would do it, but we can't find it. But we can find that in Jeremiah chapter 10, centuries before Christ even came on the earth physically. So what about that? We'll review those things too. We'll make sure everybody's edge is sharp, since we know we're in that season. We're in the right season of the feast dedication. We're also in that season where every time you turn on the TV, pull up your phone, you're on the app, you're surfing, you got banner ads popping up with all this sad Nimrod's Day stuff, right? He's really celebrating a man called Nimrod, but then turned into like a day that promotes all types of commerce and things like that. But it's idol worship. Even the act of the tree representing Nimrod and the ornaments being put in the tree, supposed to be the enemies of Nimrod, supposed to hang their heads on the evergreen tree branches as ornaments. All these things are just things we should have nothing or want to have anything to deal with. But it doesn't surprise me when the prophets had visions of this empire in the future. They were called Babylon the Great. It makes sense, right? I can see the prophets seeing maybe that tree on the White House lawn, or seeing the tree in front of at 30 Rock, right down in New York City, and saying, "Oh, This future kingdom has trees like we do here in Babylon. Okay, this is Babylon the Great. It's the same spirit. We're doing the same thing. Oh, they got pyramids. Oh, okay, it's like spiritual Egypt. They got obelisks, right, at their headquarters. Yeah, so it's a spiritual Egypt, right? The prophet saw these things that we think are new, but they saw these things either during their time, before their times, and called them as such. But like scriptures say in Romans 12 and 21, be not overcome with evil, overcome evil with good. So as much as folks want to give you the general happy holidays, we just say, oh, thank you for knowledge and feast dedication. But as they try to push the sad Xmas, sad Nimrod day on you, you can push back with the feast dedication on them. So yeah, this is what I celebrate, and here's why. Overcome that evil with good. We have a holy day that you can celebrate that actually has a righteous purpose, as opposed to what them and most people are doing. So we can't say enough to everybody that's here, that's watching, that's listening. Happy feast dedication once again. We say it in the Hebrew, Shar Chag Chanukah Yasha'Allah. Thank you for joining us tonight on this lovely Saturday evening. I know they've been talking about it since Thursday, probably even before then. Talking about us getting some inches, 1 to 3 inches worth of snow coming down in this part of the country, but it'll probably, I think it might be our first snowfall this year, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's supposedly going to stick. But either way, just make sure you guys drive safe out there. If you are traveling and there is inclement weather you have to deal with, may the Most High be with all of our children that are out here following the truth of Israel. Okay, thank you, Robert. Oh, yeah.
Gun. As we went to great length to read the stories in Maccabees as to what the Feast of Dedication is about, it is important to bring it back home. While we are not in Jerusalem, we don't have any temple, physical temple to dedicate, but the temple that is most important is still here, and we should honor that in rededication of the temple. So with that, let's take a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 16. And it reads, "In what agreement have the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." So that's the real temple, because we know the law was a schoolmaster to bring us exactly to the understanding of everything that the Most High did for 46 years, give us instructions, give us all the measurements, go pull all the resources. But the real deal that the Most High was doing all that for is to get us to understand, to get here. So granted, we're not in Jerusalem, we don't have a temple, but the temple that matters most is here. Right? So as we rededicate the temple, we should examine this temple to see if we are in the condition for the Spirit of the Most High to dwell in. Right? So another scripture is 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16, and it reads, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?" Most of us may not consider that we are the temple of God, and if we do, we may not get the full picture of what that means. But the best way to get a picture of what that means is think about the physical temple, what he represents. As we read in the scriptures, that you brought out. What did the temple represent? That's where the Spirit of the Most High would dwell, right? And that's where we would do the sacrifices. So now that we don't have the temple, we are the living sacrifice, right? We are the living sacrifice, so we should conduct this temple as if it were that physical temple that we have, right? So all the sacrifice that we used to do, aside from the animals that we used to sacrifice, we are the living sacrifice. So that temple is still well and alive today. So our conduct, the way we honor the Most High, we should be that temple that the Most High really wants His Spirit to delight in each and every day, right? So another scripture is John 2 and verse 19. St. John chapter 2 and verse 19. And it reads, Yahushua answered and said unto them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Why would Yahushua will destroy his temple, which is his body? Because his body was in the condition where he carried our sin. So he had to be cleansed from all the sins that he was carrying for us to cleanse that temple and rebuild it right back up again. So when he came back up and that temple was clean, that's significant that we die with him, and we should always make sure that we clean that temple and keep it in a condition that the Spirit of the Most High will dwell in. Right? So last scripture is Ephesians chapter 2, 19. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 19. And it reads, know therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints of the household of God. This was a message gearing towards all the tribe of Israel, not just the southern tribe, but also the northern tribe. And it says, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yahushua Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. And just to show us again, while we reminiscence about the temple that was rededicated, right, to the Most High after it was defiled by the heathen, most importantly, today, we still have the temple that matters most, which is us. We should pay attention as we keep in the Feast of Dedication to this temple, because the Spirit of the Most High is live and well, and it dwells in that temple. And we should clean that temple each and every day to the best of our ability, so that we can retain the Spirit of the Most High, right, in it as we go on, as we looking for Yahushua to make the second coming to redeem us from this captivity and take us to Jerusalem, where the Most High will build that temple again, that physical temple, as a memorial of what happened. But the most important temple is us.
Okay. You had Romans 12 and 1 in there too? Or no?
No.
Could you just, I guess, call up the ones that you had?
It was 1 Corinthians chapter 3:16, John 2:19, and 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and 16.
To that twice.
Right, and Ephesians 2:19 and 22. John 2:19.
Second
Corinthians 6:16. Fine. 2
Yeah.
Corinthians 6:16.
Okay, I got them all. I think you made a reference to Romans 12, so I might do it. About our bodies a living sacrifice.
Correct. I made a reference to it. Yeah.
That's what it is. All right, the water for those to show that while we're talking about the altar burnt offering, by extension, it includes the temple. It's like it's kind of like the centerpiece for the temple. It's like the last thing that we get to when we get to the temple is the altar burnt offering, right? It's like like we talked about before, the go-between us and the Most High, or the sons of Aaron who were acting with the Most High. They had altar burnt offerings, the thing that's right there in the middle before you go into the holy place. So it's like connected. It's like a centerpiece for the temple as whole. So why for those scriptures to kind of connect those dots, and for us to be reminded of the importance of the temple in conjunction with the altar burnt offering, physically, but more importantly, spiritually, it represents. Any other verses? Okay. It looks like. He did. All right, so with that, we'll wrap up. But like I said before, happy feast dedication. Shar Kag Kanaka Yasha Allah. For everybody that was able to join with us, not only in person, but over the live stream as well as over the teleconference. May you have safe travels during this holy day and holy season as far as righteousness. And water too for I guess the citation we got in the chat for some of new folks that have visited us. Strengthen the ruach, to strengthen the ruach, the spirit. Okay, thank you, Dan Hodges, for your salutations as well. Okay, guess we can do real quick is do some quick housekeeping before we do closing prayers. So our class time is every Tuesday and Friday night from 7 to 10 p.m. You can call our number at 667-770-1085, access code 521455. This is a holy day, so it's a little more formal as far as we go through a structured lesson on a certain topic. But during those class times, you see scrolling at the bottom, the floor is open, especially for new folks. You want to call in and ask a question about any topic pertaining to the Bible, pertaining to prophecy, or anything. Even you may think it may not even be Bible related. You'd be surprised. The Bible covers and addresses just about anything and everything you can think of. Right? It truly is the book of life. It's a matter of knowing where to read to find the answers. Also, during those same times, if you want to join us on Zoom, we have www.profitabletalks.com, one word. That's the web Zoom link. So regardless what device you're on, whether you're on your phone or tablet or laptop or desktop computer, right? As long as you have Zoom installed on your device, if you go to your web browser on your device and just type that in, it'll open up Zoom automatically. And then as long as you're logged in with one of your accounts, whether it's like a Gmail or the email account, you can join us and we can see you in person and we could communicate that way as well. We would commend, or we should say we would compel everybody, especially first time joining, to at least turn your cameras on so we can make sure that you're here for sincere reasons and not just coming in to troll. Some folks do, not just here, but also in the chat we have here. Sometimes folks come in and just spew nonsense. But let us know that, yeah, you are coming for the right reasons and you have, actual questions. You want to get breakdowns and not just coming into the gainsay or to see what's going on, right? We take it serious. Also, if you're able to donate to a particular branch of Christ, if you want to send us, say, a check or money order for tithes or free will offerings, or things we do for holy days, and all our donations go towards the school itself. Right? None of our priests here are salaried by any means, but any resource you provide us go towards providing this venue as far as live streaming events, to do certain holy days, to do certain work within the community, things like that, right? You can send it to 3826B Germantown Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19140. Checks or money orders. If you want to donate to us online, we have this meeting, which is paypal.me/HYK12, paypal.me/HYK12. Or you could Zelle us directly at 646-620-7378, 646-620-7378. Please like and share the video as we get closer and closer to that day when Christ makes his second coming, right? We want to make sure we spread the word, spread that gospel out there. Us, other branches of Christ, we send prayers out to all you during this feast of dedication. May the Most High Christ, by the Holy Spirit, be with all of you and keep you throughout, like I said, today and throughout this week, and strengthen you in that righteous spirit of his Son, Jesus the Christ, or as we say in the Hebrew, Yahushua Mashiach. Continue to watch and pray Israel. Keep an eye on the prophecies that come to pass, as we can use those to hopefully wake up more of our people, as we're part of that prophecy ourselves, coming into this knowledge. Okay? So with that, we'll say happy feast of dedication once again. A Sharka Kaka once again. And that will do the closing prayers. We'll talk to everybody again this Tuesday at 7 p.m. As I showed earlier, that'll be the next time we convene for the weekly class. So enjoy the feast, Israel. Enjoy this first day of the feast. Enjoy the whole week of the feast of dedication. All right. Shalom. And with that, let's do the closing prayers. Barakateawa, Bashim Yahushai, Asharan, Tananao, Pari Agapan, Tuwala Aman. La Yahweh, Bashim Yahushai, Yashar. English translation. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, that gives to us the fruit of the vine. Thank you, so be it to Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, with Israel. By Bois, Plenty Way, Rockstone, stand and face Jerusalem. Yahweh Bashem Yahushai Babushai Shemai Lanawa I Yem Yen I Shalak Mike Allah Wala Alhaim Tazwatakim Lashma I Barak Nagan Wakaziyak Banya Yash Allah Washalak Lanawa Rabim Kakamai Rabim the Rabim Bayanai Rabim Sabalanwa Rabim Mama One Rabim Akwa Rabim Bahabim Rabim Haganai Rakanai Basalak Kal Katsandawa Akia Akua Wayash Allah Tanya Why will Bashem Yahushua the water English translation. Yahweh, in the name of Yahushua, please listen to us now. Right now, send Michael and the righteous powers to watch over, bless, heal, protect, and make strong the children of Israel. And send to us much wisdom, much knowledge, much understanding, much patience, much faith, much brotherhood, much love, much spiritual protection, and forgive all our sins. For the brothers, sisters in Israel, always and forever, in the name of Yahushua, thank you, so be it. Four Corners Prayer. Yahweh Bashem Yahushua Raknawe Oyash Allah Bapathes Apari Shema Yahweh English translation. Yahweh, in the name of Yahushua, bless us in Israel in the house of books. And then we said, Hear Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Prayer for the food. Yahweh, Gadawo, Bashem, Gadawanya, Yahushua, Babakusha, Barak, Makal, Yanawa, Shatayawat, Yanawa, Yayan, Yanawa, Lacham, Yanawa, Shakarat, Yanawa, Sakab, Shah, Hakab, Kanakab, Bashem, Yahushua, the water. Okay. So happy feast dedication, Israel. Enjoy the feast. We'll be talking to you this week.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom, everybody.